So, Reece, as someone at Flaunt that has relocated for work, we're going to discuss that today. What were your main reasons? What were your thought process? Was it lack of opportunity? Because obviously you came from Manchester to Leeds, both big digital cities. So yeah, I think we're going to just dig into that.
Yeah, probably a bit of both. Being from around the Hull area, I'd found out career-wise what I wanted to do quite early on. But also, I always knew that I wanted to move to a bigger city. And I'd visited Manchester quite a few times, and I got a feel for it there before I'd even moved there. And career-wise, I was looking for the next step. And agency work as well. At this point, I'd worked in an agency, and I'd moved in-house, and I knew that I wanted to be back into the agency life, and to try and combine that with the next step in terms of moving out. I just sort of targeted Manchester as my next destination, really. And then it was kind of crazy because obviously most people usually move out, unless it's university, obviously, move out local and they still like see their friends a lot. Whereas for me, it was like a leap, 2 hours, train journey. But I was confident that was the city that I wanted to go to. And like you say, opportunity. Definitely, I knew that there was going to be career progression there, no matter what, and lifestyle as well. You're going there for a different lifestyle, which is what I kind of just dived headfirst into, really, with only really any prior knowledge of the city, having visited, for the occasional day or a night out. I had no idea what it was like to live in Manchester.
What would you say the most difficult part? Because obviously you've done it twice. You've gone Hull to Manchester, right, and then Manchester to Leeds.
Well, I went back to Hull for a bit, so then Hull to Leeds. Yeah, there was like a little bit of a gap in between. The most difficult part, probably social groups. When I moved to Manchester, I had a couple of friends that lived there, who I would see occasionally. But outside of that, it was only really people from work that I would meet and stuff. I never did any clubs or things like that. And the same with moving here. I think as well, it's easy when you move in. So for example, obviously you've got Leeds, which is an hour away from Hull. I've got friends in Sheffield, which is 40 minutes away. You think, oh, it's not far, but it kind of is like an hour's train journey, although it's not really that far. Organising meetups, doing stuff like that doesn't always happen that much. And when you're in a new city and all you've got is your flat and the office as your two places that you need to be, it can quite easily become a bit monotonous if you don't strive to push yourself beyond those boundaries, in a sense.
Enough distance to be a blockage to making.
Yeah, it is. Even 20 minutes. It's everyone's living a similar life. Everyone's got stuff to do after work. It's not always as simple as, it's only a short journey, let's go for a drink. It's actually, I've only finished work this time and got this to do tomorrow, and it can go weeks before things happen. And then when those weeks stack up, you're actually, I've moved to a new city here, which on the face of it looked great. But when you get used to it, it's work home every week, almost every day. You can get to a point where you're right, this is quite a lot.
How much of that relocation from Hull to Manchester was during COVID?
So it was the start of 2021. So it was in lockdown.
Yeah.
So I didn't even see the flat before I moved there. I literally, I got the job in the period between Christmas and New Year's. And then I was right, now I need to find a flat. So I literally just was on Rightmove every day, looking. I found this flat that it wasn't even actually furnished yet, so it was just a shell. So I'd seen a showroom of it, which was actually nothing like the flat that I moved into in the end. And they sent me a floor plan. So I had a floor plan of what the flat was going to be like. No real concept of what it was going to look like. And then because it was so popular, it was a new build. And because of COVID, they'd half the price. So it was really central and a lot cheaper than it should have been, or at least what it was going to be. So I had to pick it based off this showroom, the location, and the price. So I was like, right, yeah, I'll have it. I'll pay the money now. Turned up, and it was just this empty room. They'd not even put the sofa in or any of the furnishings yet. And I was like, right, this is interesting. And then a few more weeks went by, and then it was early February, I think, that I moved in. Saw it for the first time as it was the day that I moved into the flat, and everything was shut, no bars open, nothing. So in a weird way, it was kind of nice because it forced me out of the flat. There was if there was nothing to do on a weekend because no one was open, so I would just walk around the city. That became like a pastime, was just walking around, and because I'd only spent like the odd time there was a lot to explore, which actually went a long way for making me feel comfortable there, which I didn't so much get at Leeds, but you've got to kind of force yourself out there, just walking around the city and getting a feel for it, because then when everything opens up, or at least in this case when everything opened up again, I knew the city like the back of my hand before it, like, actual life started there.
And when you were making the call to relocate from a career standpoint, was that just through lack of opportunity where you were, or?
Yeah, I mean, agency wise, Hull in general, which was the nearest city to me, relatively small. It's one of those where you can like reel off like probably about 5 or 6 that you know of, whereas you could just go on Google Maps, type in digital agency Manchester, and a huge list comes up, and the vibe is completely different. Obviously a city centre office in Manchester is completely different to offices in Hull, where it's just an office in an office block kind of thing. And that was something that I always knew that I wanted. Growing up in a smallish sort of rural area, I think you kind of strive for something bigger. Even if it was going to be for a year, I just wanted a taste of the sort of bigger city, bigger scale.
And now everything's sort of getting back to normal-ish. Pretty much COVID's behind us a little bit. Do you feel like you've started to taste that a little bit more now?
Yeah, well, it was weird because when I first moved to Manchester, I only had a 6-month lease on the flat, and that sort of ended at the end of August. I think it was only end of June. It was like June, July time that everything actually opened back up. So I probably only had about 2 months of like normal life in Manchester. But when I think back to it, that kind of feels like the whole thing, because so much happened in those 2 months of obviously being like held back, just going to the flat, walking around. So when I actually did start going out, it felt like that was the entire year in a weird sort of way. Obviously since I moved to Leeds this year, everything's been pretty normal. So it's like a completely different experience. But then that's the sort of divide is when I went to Manchester, it didn't matter so much that I didn't have a social group, because I would just walk around the city by myself anyway, because you couldn't meet anyone. Whereas now everything's open, so you need people to do stuff with, and that's when the friends and social group has a bit more of an impact.
Yeah, I imagine it's difficult moving to a new place and just having your flat and not really having an established social group, and then a bit of isolation.
Yeah, there is, but it's all about, like, you've got to make it yourself. Like I said, that the half of it is choosing the city you want to be in, getting the job there. But once you're there, it's all about what are you going to do to make yourself comfortable. Like I say, even just going for a walk around the city might not feel like you're gaining anything from it, but really you're getting comfortable with the city. It's like when you're in your hometown, you're so comfortable there because you know it like the back of your hand. It's the same with cities. Even if in Leeds, I'll just walk down the canal or walk to the other side of the city centre, or just walking around it on a weekend, grab a coffee. All of a sudden you find a new place you like to go for a drink, or a new place you go for lunch, and then on a lunchtime you end up walking to a different part of the city, or on a weekend you want to go and grab some lunch somewhere else, or even if you're working from home, you're like, oh, actually, get out the flat, go to a coffee shop, and all of a sudden, just by walking around the city, you've explored it without really realising, and you've found some new spots where you can like diversify your day a little bit.
What kind of advice would you give to people that in your position thinking about relocating?
I would say definitely visit the city first, but in both instances, even though when I visited Leeds before, it was usually friends at uni. So we would spend a lot of time around Headingley, which I've rarely been to since I've moved here. Obviously it's the other side of the city, so it was almost like a completely different experience. Like I never saw any of this side of Leeds before, but I was familiar enough with it that I knew where to go at certain points. The one thing I would say is that once you have moved, don't give up early, because it's really easy to, after like a month or two, I imagine it's the same for people at uni as well. After a month or two, if you haven't got any friends in that city and it does start to get a bit monotonous, you think, actually, this isn't for me. Like, I'd rather just be around friends and sort of give up on all the other reasons you moved to the city for. Just try and make it, like I say, you've just got to try and make it yourself, even if it's just going for a walk. If you want to do activities, join clubs, I think that'd be great. I know that a few of my mates have done that. But yeah, just put yourself out there where you can, really.
Worth it?
Definitely worth it. Yeah, definitely worth it.